We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It's Sunday. We're in the midst of the weekend. Not as much popping as normally happens during the regular weekday, but we've got some things to talk about, and we'll do what we can to make this show interesting. By the way, thanks to Ed for joining me on the show yesterday. It's always a great time with Ed. And I'm getting more and more emails, which you'll hear talking about Ed and liking what he does. He's a smart guy. He's very articulate, and he and I have a good rapport. So I enjoy having him on all the time. One thing I will say is next week, between Monday and Wednesday, I'm looking for a listener to come on. I'm going to Portland, Maine on Thursday morning with my wife. It's our 40th wedding anniversary, and we get out of town, go to the Northeast with the colors and all that sort of stuff. Whatever my wife wants to do, it makes her happy. She wants to go to Portland, Maine, so that's where the fuck we're going. But I'd like to do one or two listener shows. We can record it at any time so that when I'm on the road on Thursday, you'll have a show on Thursday, but maybe something pre-recorded with a listener for Friday, maybe Saturday. I don't know. Just something to think about. If you're ready to do something on the show, let's set something up. Let's get her done. Anyhow, what I was doing yesterday, I didn't do much work in the sense of focusing on the news. And when you're talking about Saturdays, there's not a lot of new stuff coming out. There's some. But I didn't do anything because my wife and I, my brother and his wife, we got in a car. We drove about 4.5 hours north to bury my father's ashes. We have there's a very small cemetery up by where the family had our cabin at a time in northern Minnesota. It's a very small cemetery, and my grandmother and grandfather are buried there. My uncle, my dad's brother, is buried there, and it was my grandmother's wishes that all four of them would be buried in the same spot. And my father passed away a while back, and this whole process is long and whatever. So anyway, we drove up, picked up the ashes, and then went to the cemetery and buried the ashes. Now, a lot of people will come to me and say, "Oh, geez, I'm sorry." As I've told you before, I didn't have much of a relationship with my father. In spite of that, we wanted to do the right thing and do what was needed to be done. Kind of shore up all the details of his life and put him in the spot where he wanted to be, and more importantly, where my grandmother wanted all of them to be. That's really what this was about. My brother and I felt a duty to my grandmother, who was very strongly feeling that this is what she wanted. They have the tombstone with the names on it already. It seemed easy, and that's what we did. So that's what I did pretty much yesterday. That's why I think I only did one TikTok, which is unusual. But now we're back. Now we're back to work, talking about the shit that's going on. And this week should promise to be interesting. Now, I was telling people that Alan Weisselberg will be testifying on Monday in the lawsuit against Donald Trump, and it's against him too. He's one of the people that are being sued. And some people corrected me. It's not going to be Monday. It's going to be Tuesday. Monday's a holiday. Turns out they're right. Monday is a holiday. It's Columbus Day. So it would appear as though that Alan Weisselberg will testify on Tuesday. Doesn't really make much difference. Donald Trump's situation with that lawsuit is not good. He's tried to get it dismissed. He's tried to get it delayed, and the judge ain't having it. Anything Donald Trump suggests is just so far off base, it's ridiculous. And like I said, he sat in that courtroom for 2.5 days. And then that third day, he just couldn't take it anymore. He's getting barraged with all this information that is true, has been verified, and he can't deal with it. He can't say anything. He can't do anything. So he can't divert or distract from it. And that puts him in a very uncomfortable position. And I was thinking about that, we're in the middle of a civil lawsuit. He couldn't last 2 days in a trial that he didn't even really have to show up to. He's not required to be there in this trial. But we know he was trying to get out of being deposed by Michael Cohen, his lawsuit against Michael Cohen. Then he drops the lawsuit because he doesn't want to be deposed. It's just a comedy of errors. But he couldn't sit there for 2.5 days and take it. Can you imagine what it's going to be with 4 indictments, 91 felony charges to date? There'll be more. And then he has to sit in those trials. I mean, that's really what it's going to be for Donald Trump, maybe starting in March or so, henceforth to the 2024 election and likely beyond. He's going to be in court all the time. This lawsuit's going to take everything he owns, all the money he has, all the prestige he's enjoyed, and then he's going to be in court for criminal charges all the time. This is why I say there's no way he's going to be the nominee. He won't have the time, the money, the emotional condition will be depleted because of the pressures of these trials. He doesn't have a chance to make it. We can see he's already starting to fall apart. He's starting to say some crazy shit, and everything he tries doesn't work. This is going to get to Donald Trump, and it's not going to go well for him, and he will not be the nominee or president of the United States under the Republican Party flag. All right, well, let's get to some emails. Actually, these first two came from the podcast website, comments from podcasts. First one comes from Daniel. He says, "What's with the garbage polls on Morning Joe? Republicans trouncing Dems in economy, inflation, etc. Trump leading Biden. Where do they get these polls and why broadcast this shit?" I've talked about this many times, and I'm equally as frustrated when I watch these things because these are all just lies. I mean, when we're talking about polls, you have to consider a lot of things. Who owns the poll? Who put the money into this? We know in at least one poll that it was a Trump supporter that backed this particular poll. Then who do they ask? Are they asking millennials and Gen Zs? No, they're not. The veracity of these polls is ridiculous. We saw how bad they were in 2022 when they said there would be a red wave. We saw it in those people that Donald Trump endorsed and they lost. It's all a bunch of shit, and you can't take it seriously. This is all stuff we've heard before. And that brings us to the question as to why would the media repeat these? I was just talking about this with my brother. My brother and I have both always been, since we were very young, boxing fans. And I liken what's going on with the media in terms of the Trump-Biden presumed contest. Like I said, I don't expect Trump to even be the candidate for the Republican Party, but let's just say he is. Why would the media give out these polls that suggest everything's so close? They're a lot like a boxing promoter. If you've got a guy who's maybe a heavyweight champion, and then the other guy is what they used to call in boxing the tomato can, you can't go and say, oh, this guy's going to kick this guy's ass, because no one will buy tickets. Nobody will pay attention to it. So they've got to hype up the loser on this side to make it look like a battle of the Titans so they can sell tickets. Same thing goes for the media. You aren't going to watch what they're spewing out unless you think there's some closeness to this race. I think when we get to the election in 2024, then they'll stand up and go, oh my God, this is amazing. Nothing we expected. Joe Biden is kicking the shit out of Donald Trump or whoever the Republican candidate is. And the Democrats are pounding on all the rest of the people in Congress and governors and such. It's a big blue wave. They'll act surprised, and then that'll be more exciting for people to tune in. This is what it is. They're setting this up so that it appears to be some concern to scare some people to keep them watching. That's all it is. I've seen them do it before. They're doing it now. You can't take any of that seriously. If you look at facts, logic, common sense, that's absolutely wrong. No way Donald Trump or any Republican can beat Joe Biden for the presidential election. There's going to be all kinds of problems for members of the House and senators. They're going to lose some seats. It's just inevitable based on all the things that are happening. So, Daniel, I agree with you. I think it's a bunch of bullshit, but I don't think you need to take it seriously because I think it's a lie. It's a flat out fucking lie. All right, the next one comes from Catherine. Thank you, Daniel, by the way. Catherine says, I'm pretty sure it was Alan Weisselberg that knew or knows the most about the Orange Circuit Peanuts finances. Michael Cohen worked with Alan, but he was really second. Cohen talked a lot about Alan. Catherine, you're absolutely right. If anybody knows what's going on, it's Alan Weisselberg. He was the chief financial officer. He's the one that handled where the money went and how the money came in. Now, nothing happened without Donald Trump's input and a hand on the situation, but nobody knows more than Alan Weisselberg. And that's why it was so frustrating when he was on trial and he finally pled out. He refused to flip on Donald Trump. He decided he would only flip on the company, which is kind of a sideways way of testifying against Donald Trump, because Trump organization was small. They didn't have that many people in the home office, if you will. And Donald Trump approved and looked at everything, touched everything. But still, Alan Weisselberg wouldn't sell him out. Now, he's being forced to testify in this case with the lawsuit. Here's what you need to understand. He is one of the people being sued. Donald Trump, Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Weisselberg, and this McConney guy that testified the other day. They're being sued too. Now, Alan Weisselberg will need to give up some information. And some people are saying, well, if he doesn't give up the information, I even said this, he could go to jail. I don't think that's true in this case, but Alan Weisselberg is at a point in time where he might want to be able to cut a deal in this particular lawsuit. If he flips on Donald Trump, then he may be saved from some of the financial damages. This isn't a criminal trial, so nobody's going to jail over this one. But that said, the guy that Alan Weisselberg cut a deal with was Alvin Bragg. He is the DA in the Manhattan district. And this is something I've said before. We haven't heard much about it. I'm the only one that I know of that's talked about it. But Donald Trump was not criminally indicted in the Manhattan district for all of his fraud. Now, the fraud that happened in the company was proved. There were 17 convictions of fraud by the Trump organization. A lot of evidence is coming out here in this particular trial for the lawsuit. And I wouldn't be surprised at some point Alvin Bragg says, oh, by the way, I've got a criminal indictment for Donald Trump, because he was certainly culpable in the crimes committed by the Trump organization and all this ridiculous fraud. This lawsuit proves it. So it almost be it would almost be crazy for Alan Weisselberg, Alvin Bragg not to indict him. Alan Weisselberg's in a bad situation. He doesn't want to testify against Donald Trump, but as tough as he was and how he stood by Donald Trump, you spend 5 months in Rikers, you might have a different look at what your future might be if you're in your 70s and you have the prospect of going back to Rikers. That's a strong motivator for Alan Weisselberg to speak the truth. I guess we'll find that out when he testifies on Tuesday, but I have a feeling Weisselberg has pretty much had enough of this stuff. He sees that Donald Trump is headed down the shitter. So what does he have to lose but to testify against Donald Trump? But we'll see. We'll see. All right. I got 2 emails coming from Old Soul. She says, "Hey, Boomer, I have 2 emails below. The first is from today and the last is from yesterday. Did you see the letter Representative Jared Moskowitz sent to Palm Beach, Florida? Moskowitz wrote the letter advising Palm Beach County that Trump committed tax fraud by saying Mar-a-Lago is 50 to 100 times more valuable than the $18 million appraised value. Based on Trump's own words, Moskowitz is now calling for the Palm Beach County to increase the amount of taxes Trump pays. He literally used Trump's own words from one of those press conferences, the tantrums he held outside the courtroom. Jared Moskowitz is one of my favorite members of the House. He kicks Republican butt during the fake hearings, and no one trolls better than Moskowitz. Thanks, Boomer." Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Jared Moskowitz, I think he's a freshman representative, but he's a sharp guy, and not unlike Katie Porter, he brings receipts and he trolls the Republicans at every chance. And basically what he's saying here is that Donald Trump says his home, Mar-a-Lago, is valued at more than the $18 million that was talked about in this case. The judge wasn't suggesting what the value of Mar-a-Lago was. She was just talking about how it was filed in taxes. And we've talked about this before, but I'm going to clarify it one more time. Donald Trump has Mar-a-Lago. If it were registered as a single family home, it would be worth dramatically more than what it is now because it is registered as a club or a hotel. So the value is going to be much lower. If you could sell this as a hotel and or a private home, you could get more money, but this is specifically zoned to be a hotel or a club. So some rich guy wants to come along and buy this place for his home. He can't. You see, Donald Trump was trying to have it both ways. He wanted it to be his home and be able to brag about how much it's valued at, but he also didn't want to pay a lot of taxes. So he liked the fact that it was registered or zoned a hotel. See, he was trying to get both ends. He was trying to have his cake and eat it too. He wanted to brag about this valuable home, but he only wanted to pay taxes on the basis that it was a hotel. So what Jared Moskowitz is doing is saying, oh, you say your hotel is 200, 300, $1 billion. You say that's what it is? Well, let's look at your taxes. In your taxes, it was at 18, 20, 22, something like it, $22 million. So Moskowitz is basically saying, if that's true, well, then you cheated the state of Florida and the federal government out of taxes by underestimating the value of your home. See, what Donald Trump wanted to do, he just wanted to game the system, and he's been able to do that most of his life, so it's not surprising he would try to do it again. He would have this special zoning so he could pay low taxes. And then should he ever want to sell it or leverage it for other loans, he would just tell people it's his private home. So people would either believe him or check on it. If they checked on it, they'd know differently. But if they believed him and Donald Trump got away with a lot of this, then they just give him a loan based on a home that's worth 300, 200 million or whatever it is. This is bad news for Donald Trump. This is absolute proof of the crimes he's being accused of. So, yeah, Jared Moskowitz, he's funny, he's articulate, and he doesn't mind getting in people's faces. I like that. And it'll be interesting to see how his career burgeons after we get past this Trump bullshit. All right, the second email coming from Old Soul. Hey, Boomer, I just finished watching your video titled On His Way Out. Thank you for covering the Matt Gaetz accusations so I don't have to repeat the details. As barbaric and disgusting as Gaetz is, there's something even worse, the Republican Party. They knew exactly who Gaetz is, but instead of speaking up for the victims and cooperating with the initial DOJ ethics investigation, they said nothing. They said nothing when he showed them videos and images of young girls on the House floor. They were complicit in their silence, and they covered for him. A year and a half ago, Madison Cawthorn vaguely mentioned the underbelly of his party and the Washington, D.C. establishment. They booted him out of office so fast, the only thing left for him were the skid marks left behind from his wheelchair. Sure, they're speaking up and sounding the alarm now, but it's not because they're the party of family values. It's not because they have a moral compass and it's what their faith requires. They aren't speaking up for the young girls, Gaetz forever scarred. They are speaking up because Matt Gaetz pissed them off by vacating the speaker's chair, thus cutting off their cash flow. Kevin McCarthy was the biggest fundraiser in the Republican Party, and we all know Republicans don't like it when you mess with their money. Now, Matt Gaetz is doing exactly what I said he'd do in my last email. He's pulling a page out of the Trump playbook saying Republican accusations are a political attack because he ousted McCarthy. Gaetz released a statement today saying, quote, I don't think Mark Wayne Mullen and I have had said 20 words to each other on the House floor. This is a lie from someone who doesn't know me and who is coping with the death of political career of his friend Kevin McCarthy. Thoughts and prayers, end quote. Republicans have put themselves in a position that if they do decide to cooperate with the DOJ ethics investigation, their motivation is at best questionable. I had a feeling he was going to do this. I don't know how they weren't prepared, but then again, when do Republicans have a plan for anything? Could they really have been dumb enough to think that they could get hold anything over the head of a person as immoral as Matt Gaetz? I don't know if any victims will be able to come forward because I have a feeling transactions were made and NDAs were signed. Plus, who would want to turn their lives upside down and get caught up in the middle of this Republican infighting? I just hope they can find some kind of solace knowing Republicans are now motivated to expose Gaetz's deplorable behavior. Republicans aren't motivated for the right reasons, but they are motivated nonetheless. Perhaps it will be enough to turn off voters and he'll never be in a position of power again. People like Gaetz don't change. Sooner or later, he'll get comfortable, thinking he got away with it, and his urges will cause him to victimize again. He'll get caught. It's just a matter of time. Getting away with it for now is sickening, but he won't get away with it forever. I look forward to seeing that turd in handcuffs, and I guarantee you his downfall will be because of the strength of women. Thanks, Old Soul. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If what Mullen said was true, they knew about these misdeeds and criminality of Matt Gaetz years ago, but they chose not to speak out. Now that they're mad at him, they are speaking out. That says a lot about Matt Gaetz, but it says even more about the Republicans in the House of Representatives. It's ridiculous. Matt Gaetz will probably get blown out of the House of Representatives. I know he's thinking about running for governor of Florida. I don't know what's going to happen with that because, well, fucking Florida. I mean, they reelected Ron DeSantis, an absolute fascist. Would they elect Matt Gaetz? Probably, probably. But again, it's Florida, so what could you expect? All right, the next email says, "Hi Boomer, the shows with Ed are a hoot and very informative, but they also include the bonus of you and Ed getting on a roll at some point, all the way to having Donald duct taped to the witness chair with a ball gag. And Ed let his freak flag fly and wanting corporations hung and the Freedom Caucus indicted. Ed don't play. Are you 100% sure Ed wasn't actually one of the Chicago Seven? I'm sensing the old hippie in my man," said like Denzel would say it. Best garage door, Jeff. P.S. It would be great to hear from someone that listened to you two on the air describe that a little. I assume there's no video or audio available. Not sure what you're talking about. It would be great to hear from someone that listened to you two on the air describe that a little. Um, well, there probably is, or probably isn't any video, but there's probably audio of it someplace. Maybe not. I don't know. And there are people that listen to the podcast, I think, that did listen to us on the radio. You have to understand what the radio situation was. It was three guys initially. It was three guys. One guy was kind of the disc jockey, Terry. Ed was the news guy, and I was the traffic guy. And I was in a different location. I wasn't sitting in the same room as they were. And since it was public radio, sometimes we had to, beg for money, as public radio stations do. And we would kind of interact. And Terry was a pretty funny guy, and Ed obviously has a sense of humor, and I'll say pretty much anything that comes to mind. So some of those conversations got pretty interesting. The one thing that I think went too far, and I didn't do it, neither did Ed, our friend Terry, who was on the show, it was Valentine's Day, and he cut out a little construction paper heart. And he took that heart. Now we're not on video; it's completely audio. But he took that heart and he stuck it to his shirt. Well, what the fuck are you doing, man? Well, I didn't see him. Ed saw him. But this is what he did. He said, he said, "Well, happy Valentine's Day for to everybody. I hope you're having a great day. I have my heart on. I'm going to have a heart on all day." I said, "Wow, you're on a public radio station owned by the Minneapolis Public Schools, and you're doing that shit." Well, that gave me some hope that I could open up and say some shit, but then I had to answer to the Department of Transportation and the radio station and feed my children at the same time. So I chose not to jump into that. But I knew in my head at some point I'd have my own podcast where I didn't have a guy in a suit standing behind me telling me what I can and can't say, and I'll fucking do whatever I want now. And the great part of it is, as Ed and I sit here and do this on the podcast when we're together, we both left the station kind of upset about the way it was being run and how people were being treated. The fact is, Ed and I can sit here on this podcast and have more listeners and more viewers than that radio station fucking ever had. So fuck them all. All right. I have another email from Matt. "What's up, Mike? LOL. I always have my Bluetooth speaker in one ear throughout it says year, but I am sure he meant ear, in one ear throughout the day, saying that I nearly shit my pants right in front of my fiance when you read my email. I had to show it to her and have her listen. She loved it too. But yeah, I'm ready to do this when you just need the time and info. So go ahead and email me when you get this, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, buddy, Matt." Okay. I may have talked about this before. Listen, Matt, if you want to be on the show, you're on. Sight unseen, you're going to be on. but you got to make the effort. You send me an email, say, Mike, I want to be on the show. I will answer when. And then when you tell me, sooner to the better, we'll try to work out a time and then you will be on the show. Okay. I don't typically email people begging people to be on the show. You got to want to be on the show and be ready to be on the show. And I know you said you are, but I need you to do that. Send me the email at rationalboomer@gmail.com. Tell me you want to be on. Tell me when you're available, and then we'll get this shit worked out. All right, the next email. Hey, Mike, good to hear Ed on the show again. Love the back and forth and chemistry you guys have. Glad he's a regular part of a already great podcast. Thank you. I saw this and had to share with you, and hoping it gives the listeners who are afraid Trump will beat Biden some hope. If you don't believe us, this story is about a Republican who pretty much says he'll vote for Biden versus Trump, even if Biden is dead, which is pretty close to how the media is reporting on Biden lately. One thing that has really pissed me off lately is the left and them writing off Biden. He's done a hell of a job, but folks like Bill Maher, who I like, are acting like Chicken Little about Biden's age. Shut up. Maher used to bitch about ageism in Hollywood, but that is actually what he's doing with Biden, and it makes him and his show unwatchable. Another big reason I'm so grateful for your show. If you're feeling nervous about 2024, turn off the so-called news. Turn on the Rational Boomer and chill the fuck out. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks again, Mike, for all you do. That's Jace. He's our buddy from Texas. Yeah, Bill Maher. You know, I've watched him, and there's sometimes I like him. Other times I don't like him. Here's my read on Bill Maher. I think Bill, like a lot of people in Hollywood, is a fucking egomaniac. He's only out there for himself, which is fine. It's his show. He's an entertainment. But because he's an entertainer, don't take what he says to heart. He's doing what all the media does. He says whatever's going to cause the most controversy to get more listeners. It's, you know, it's kind of like watching the Real Housewives of wherever the fuck. If they just talked and knitted and made cookies and shit like that, nobody would watch it. They have to get in an argument. They have to call one another names, tip over tables, and all that stuff. That's what brings people back to watch the Real Housewives of wherever the fuck. And that's, you know, that's what Bill Maher is doing. His job isn't to give you the news. His job is to get ratings so they can in turn sell advertising and make money. As long as you understand that that's their first job, then you can take what they say with a grain of salt. Honestly, I've heard so many different angles from Bill Maher, I don't even know what he believes. I mean, I think he can be funny, and I've seen him tear into some people that need to be torn into, and I like it. But other times he says shit, it just drives me crazy. He's just buying into the Republican bullshit. And that's one of the things I've told you. Everything people are afraid of right now, they're concerned about. Donald Trump being the Speaker of the House, being elected president, being so close to Biden in the polls, all that shit. You've got to take under consideration where that shit comes from. And 99.9% of the times, it comes out of the mouth of a Republican, or better yet, a Trumplefuck. So why in the world would you believe that shit? You don't believe that shit. It's fucking ridiculous. This is the problem. We've got people in the media, whether it be Bill Maher or Fox News or OAN or even MSNBC, telling you stuff that is going to get them ratings to make money, not to inform you. And he said, turn off the TV. Chase said, turn off the TV and listen to the Rational Boomer podcast. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I've never done anything on the show. Well, I won't say anything, but my goal here isn't to promote or say things that are going to get you to come back. That's the whole test here. Can I say what I mean and say what I think and try to be as honest as I can and get an audience and get them to come back? Well, so far, I would say that's true. I don't have to play these games like Bill Maher. I don't have to keep investors or people in suits happy. I'm just going to do what I do. And when I started this, I thought, well, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And if it doesn't work, okay, I tried. But so far, it's working. And if you want to get the facts, I will give you the facts. And if you want to figure a way out, a strategy of any situation, I'm the guy to talk to. Because as I've told you before, I've told you this before. I have this weird mind that anytime I have an issue or a problem in front of me, my mind goes into overdrive. I look at every possible angle. I figure out how to deal with each one of those angles, and then I go headlong into it. And I already know what I'm going to do. And it's the same thing I do with the news stories. They come out and they say Donald Trump and Joe Biden are close in the polls. Now, if that's all you listen to, you're going to freak out. Oh my God, I know better than that. So I read into it more and I take a look at what's going on. I look at facts, history, logic, common sense, and then I make a real judgment on it as opposed to just something to get you triggered. I don't care if you're triggered. I want you to be angry and I want you to be comfortable in standing up and speaking out, but I'm not trying to scare you. In fact, there is nothing going on that should scare us because there's a way out of everything. And I sense that's where we're headed now. There's only so many things we can control. And I think it's important to understand that we don't need to worry about things we can't control. We can only do what we can do, so let's do it to the best of our ability and let the chips fall where they may. That's what I did with TikToks and the Rational Boomer podcast. And as long as I put the work in, it turned out right. It turned out well. And the same can be said for our country. We can't worry about the Bill Mahers or the Fox News. There's nothing we can do about it. So let's just do what we do to the best of our ability and be determined about doing it and never let up. That's the way we win here. All right. We are going to take a quick break and we will be right back. We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast, moving through a Sunday. Sundays are always tough to do because not a lot happens over the weekend. Not the big news anyway, but it seems with all the shit going on in this country, there's more than enough to talk about. And even if there wasn't, that's my one that's my one talent is talking. And I always tell people it doesn't mean quality talking, but I can talk a lot and I can keep talking a long time. So to fill an hour, even if there isn't as much going on, not a fucking problem for me. Not a problem. I'm happy to listen to myself talk. Not really. I don't listen to the podcast after I do them. I leave that to you. If it goes well, you can say so. If it doesn't go well, you can say so too. Because there will be, when you do a podcast every day, there's going to be some bad ones or not as good as some of the others, but I do the best I can whenever I come in. So I'm feeling pretty good today. So I think we're all right today. Generally, we talk about politics. And I think this next story does have some bearing on politics, but it's more about war and violence. We've talked about the Ukraine war and Russia and all that stuff going on, and we'll probably talk more about it. But the big news from yesterday, of course, was Hamas. Hamas militants stormed from the blockaded Gaza Strip into nearby Israeli towns, killing dozens and abducting others in an unprecedented surprise attack during a major Jewish holiday Saturday. A stunned Israel launched airstrikes in Gaza, with its prime minister saying the country is now at war with Hamas and vowing to inflict an unprecedented price. Now, in an assault of startling size. Hamas gunmen rolled into as many as 22 locations outside the Gaza Strip, including towns and other communities as far as 15 miles from the Gaza border. Now, in some places, they gunned down civilians and soldiers as Israel's military scrambled to muster a response. Somebody even suggested, a politician, I can't remember who, suggested this was kind of a Pearl Harbor for Israel. Now, gun battles continued into the night. Militants held hostages and standoffs in 2 towns and occupied a police station in a third. Israeli media, citing rescue service officials, said at least 250 people were killed, 1,500 people are wounded, making it the deadliest attack in Israel in decades. At least 232 people in the Gaza Strip were killed and 1,700 wounded in Israeli strikes. The Palestinian health minister said Hamas fighters took an unknown number of civilians and soldiers captive into Gaza. Now, the conflict threatened to escalate with Israel's vows of retaliation. I don't understand what precipitated this, but what you have to understand about Israel, it's a small country, but it's an extremely powerful country. You know, when you look at Israel with the Mossad and the military, there's been a lot of fighting in the Middle East, and the Israelis have been involved in a lot of fighting. They know what the fuck is up, and I don't know what Hamas was doing in this situation. Now, in a televised address Saturday night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who earlier declared Israel to be at war, said the military will use all of its strengths to destroy Hamas capabilities. But he warned this war will take time. It will be difficult. Keep in mind, too, that Israel does have nuclear weapons. I'm not saying they're going to use it, but that's always a threat when there's a war like this, like we have in Ukraine with Russia. Now, all the places that Hamas hides in, operates from, we will turn them into ruins, he added. Get out of there now, he told Gaza residents, who have no way to leave the tiny, overcrowded Mediterranean territory of 2.3 million people. Now, Israeli airstrikes in Gaza intensified after nightfall, flattening residential buildings and giant explosions, including a 14-story tower that held dozens of apartments. Now, around 3 a.m., a loudspeaker atop a mosque in Gaza City blared a stark warning to residents from a nearby apartment buildings: evacuate immediately. Just minutes later, an Israeli airstrike reduced one 5-story building to ashes. After one Israeli strike, a Hamas rocket barrage hit 4 cities, including Tel Aviv and a nearby suburb. Throughout the day, Hamas fired more than 3,500 rockets. Then that comes from the Israeli military. 3,500 rockets. This isn't just a little skirmish. I think they may be absolutely right that this is the start of a war. And this is the last thing we need, a war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. And this is something that America's going to have to get involved in. And I don't mean fighting, I'm talking diplomatically. Now, the government, our politicians, have always stood by how strongly they stand with Israel. And I get it, and it's justified, but I don't understand how Hamas thought they were going to get away with this. You fuck with Israel, and you've got some serious fucking trouble. This could be very ugly, maybe even more ugly than the Ukraine thing, and that's hard to imagine. Now, in an amateur video, hundreds of terrified young people who had been dancing at a rave fled for their lives after Hamas militants entered the area and began firing at them. Israeli media said dozens of people were killed. we have our share of skirmishes in the Middle East and sometimes wars. This seems to have escalated quickly. Again, this war, if that's what it is, was precipitated by an attack by Hamas. In America, we've got to be looking at how we can try to calm this down and stop it if we can. And we only have so much power. And we support Israel, and I get that. I think that Israel sometimes can be aggressive and do some things that are kind of fucked up, which I know makes a lot of people mad when they hear somebody say that. They're not at fault in this situation because they were attacked. I understand that they're going to do everything and anything they can to stop this bullshit, and they should. If I was going to go out and fuck with somebody, I don't think it would be Israel. But of course, we've got the Gaza Strip and all the arguments between Palestinians and Israelis and stuff, and it's been going on for decades and decades. It seemed to be pretty quiet as of late with all the other things going on in this country, but now this stirs it up again. And I'd like to say I know what to expect. I don't know as much about international diplomacy and international wars and that as I do politics. So I don't generally talk a lot about it. But I think this is going to get pretty ugly. If it was just somebody shot 2 missiles and just trying to make a point, that's one thing that happens from time to time. But when you hear about Hamas firing 3,500 missiles and then Israel retaliating, I mean, I saw video of entire buildings being leveled because of what's going on. This is certainly not something we need in this world right now. It would be nice to get the Ukraine-Russia thing done, and then we can deal with other skirmishes or problems. But this is probably potentially at a level of what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine. We don't need more fighting. We don't need more wars. So I don't know what's going to happen. I got to be honest with you. I'm not real impressed with Netanyahu. Netanyahu was kicked out of there for corrupt behavior. He was gone for a time, and then they brought him back. Netanyahu, obviously big buddies with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump, probably holds some of the same beliefs and policies that those fucking clowns have. So I would imagine there's a lot of division in Israel at this point. Again, I don't know because that's not my specialty. I'm going to try to read up on it as this thing gets more heated and try to figure it out. But make no mistake, this kind of war will affect us one way or another. We will have to get involved to a certain extent. Again, not necessarily fighting. We're not going to do that as far as I know. But we will have to get involved. And let's be perfectly honest, we got enough shit to deal with at this point with the problems in our very own country. So I'm not excited about this, and I'm not feeling too good about it, but it goes back to what I've said before. If it's a situation you can't control and don't know much about, all you can do is the best you can and hope for the best. I think ultimately we'll be fine, but this is a troubling situation. These events are pretty disturbing, especially with the numbers of people that are being injured and or killed. Now, it may not surprise you that Donald Trump Jr. made some comments, tweeted some comments, and it didn't help matters much. And it was probably it was appalling. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted a graphic video showing a dead body in Israel Saturday and used it to claim that similar attacks to those committed by Hamas were coming to the U.S. Again, it goes back to what I said before. They want to make you scared. This is going on in Israel and Gaza. It's coming here because Joe Biden's weak. Joe Biden has nothing to do with this. He may now because he's going to try to get this worked out and settled down. But what happened over there has nothing to do with American politics or Joe Biden. Now, his message followed by one by his father, in which the former president blamed the attacks on Biden's administration. Hundreds have died after Hamas fired rockets and sent troops into Israel on several fronts in a surprise early morning attack Saturday. Trump Jr. said this, just so we understand what we're up against. Trump Jr. wrote next to the video, which showed the almost naked body in the back of a pickup truck alongside a heavily armed man. Just so we all understand who the left is continually boosting at the expense of our number one ally abroad. One day this savagery will come here because not only are we allowing it, but we're encouraging it and funding it. None of that is true. You would think with all the court cases, upcoming court cases and future indictments, that you might want to keep your mouth shut. Try not to get yourself in any more trouble, but that's not how Trump rolls, whether it be Donald, Eric, or Don Jr. They can't help. They have diarrhea of the mouth. Their only answer to anything is to talk loud and continually, whether it makes sense or not. What Don Jr. said here is absolutely ridiculous, and he's going to be roasted by the left side media unmercifully. But, frankly, that's what happens to Republicans. They get roasted, and they just keep doing it until we hold people accountable for such things and accountable for the crimes they've committed. They're going to keep yakking. And this is what I've said on the podcast before. We need to start issuing indictments to the likes of Don Jr., to the sitting members of Congress. I'm not certain that this is the case, but it would be a good first step in trying to quiet the rhetoric, because the things they spew just makes everything worse, causes more concern and upheaval. So to let them talk is dangerous. And that's why I'm hoping that Jack Smith and whoever else has more indictments, we start laying them out there and start putting our thumbs on the necks of these people to stop the bullshit, stop the rhetoric, and stop putting our country in danger. Now, here's kind of a funny story. Donald Trump's former trade advisor, little Petey Navarro, you remember him, the little guy who's being trolled by some woman that's called, apparently her name is Anarchy Princess. She was the one with the sign that was kind of trolling Pete Navarro. But we know he was recently convicted of contempt, has reportedly asked the court for permission to leave the country. Good one, Petey. Yeah, I know I was just convicted, but I got to leave the country. Navarro last month said that there are murders at CNN and that the news network is guilty of negligent homicide at minimum. He was found guilty on contempt allegations earlier this month. While his sentencing rapidly approaching in January, Navarro has taken his case for leaving the country to the court, according to CBS. A week after his conviction by a jury in Washington, D.C., this is said by Scott McFarlane, a correspondent, contempt of Congress, former Trump advisor Pete Navarro asked the court for permission to travel internationally for medical treatment. MSNBC anchor and legal contributor Katie Fang summed up the answer up in 6 words. And basically she's saying it's not going to happen. He's not going to be allowed to leave the country. He's been convicted of a crime. He's soon to be sentenced. One of the things people are most concerned about, people who are convicted of crimes and not yet in jail, is, are they a flight risk? Well, when Pete Navarro says, "Can I leave the country?" That sounds like a flight risk. And he's not going anywhere. They're not going to say, oh, yeah, go ahead, get your teeth done in Mexico, whatever. Just go ahead. Just come back in time to be sentenced. These people don't have a lot of credibility. These people will lie. They're pathological liars. The idea that they're going to let him leave the country is fucking ridiculous. Not going to happen. Now, we're hearing a lot about the Speaker of the House and who's going to be the next Speaker of the House. The odds-on favorite seem to be Jim Jordan, but some of his past antics are fueling dread among vulnerable Republicans as he jockeys to try to be the Speaker of the House. The Ohio representatives chairing of a subcommittee looking into the weaponization of the federal government, along with his defenses of Donald Trump and his attempt to overturn the 2020 election, result pretty much making him the favorite son of the right. But many Republican members of Congress in more moderate states fear being tied to him as they would Donald Trump. And they could cripple his chances of taking the gavel, according to Independent's senior Washington correspondent Eric Garcia. Now, to become a speaker, that means he cannot just rely on right-wing Republicans who have looked to him for years, and he cannot simply rely on a majority of Republicans, but rather he would need to get almost wholly unified conference to even have a shot. And this is what I'm telling you. As much as people want to make you believe that Jim Jordan would be the next Speaker of the House, I say, no way. No way. He needs 218 votes. He's not going to get 218 Republican votes. And he certainly is not going to get help from the Democratic Party. You saw what they did with Kevin McCarthy. And they hate Jim Jordan more than they hate Kevin McCarthy. So the reporter goes on to say that might prove to be the biggest roadblock. Should he become Speaker, he would be the highest ranking elected Republican in the country, and every Republican would immediately be tied to him. Jim's got a lot of problems. We know that he spent some time talking to Donald Trump on the phone on January 6th. We know in one of these phone calls, it was about 10 minutes long. And the moment he got off the phone, he went back to the House floor and said, yeah, let's not certify the election. Hey, I wonder where he got that idea. If we find out, and I'm sure we will, that Donald Trump and Jim Jordan were talking on January 6th, and they were, we get a sense of what they were talking about. That basically sucks Jim Jordan into the crimes and corruption that Donald Trump committed. And the moderate Republicans, who's going to want to side with him? I guarantee you there's nobody on the Democratic side that will try to save him any more than they did Kevin McCarthy. You can listen to the Republicans saying, yeah, Jim Jordan's going to be the next speaker. He's not. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. They're going to start this whole process to get a speaker this coming Wednesday. But like Ed said, it's going to take a couple, 3 weeks minimum. And then when it comes down to it, and they can't elect anybody, what do? They can't have somebody that's not fundraising. They can't have somebody that they got to have somebody to make anything happen in the House, which is kind of important with the 2024 election coming up. They have to show that they've done something. And 2.5 years in, they have yet to show that. So they're in a tough situation. Now, the interesting thing is, excuse me, that Trump endorsed Jordan for the position. Oh, yeah, I know Donnie said, oh, I'll be Speaker of the House for 90 days. But he can't get the votes either. He knows that. He's not a real prospect for Speaker of the House. Trump endorsed Jordan for the position Thursday night after dropping consideration for running as Speaker of the House. No way Donald Trump is running for Speaker of the House. He couldn't win even if he fucking tried. Now, Republicans have just as many Republicans from swing districts who would not want to be associated with Mr. Jordan. That means those states that are kind of close between the Republican and the Democrats, they may be districts that voted for Joe Biden, so they have to be very careful. Jim Jordan's not a bright man. He's volatile. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's an insurrectionist. All of these things will come up to the top, and he'll be exposed even more than he is. So if you're worried about Jim Jordan becoming Speaker of the House, that's not going to happen. Honestly, I can't tell you who can get the votes. In order to get this done, with as divided as the Republican Party is, much like the debt ceiling and this recent stopgap measure, they're going to need the Democrats. And that's the ironic thing. They have the majority, but it's the Democrats that are getting things passed. And if Jim Jordan thinks that the Democrats are going to help him, fuck no. If he thinks he can unify the Republican Party, now there's a lot of people that want to avoid him like a fucking bad penny. He's not going to help them in their elections, and that means he's going to be cast aside. So anyway, you're worried about Jim Jordan, don't worry about it. He's not going to be the Speaker of the House. It's ultimately going to have to be something that they bring the Democrats in and they come up with some kind of compromise. And I know I hear a lot of people saying, oh, that will never happen. Well, I tell you what, if we go 2, 3, 4 weeks without a Speaker of the House, they're going to get a little antsy. They're going to panic and they're going to have to do something. The only other option I thought of, and I've never heard anybody talk about this, but I'm just trying to imagine if you're in a position where you can't elect anybody, what do you do? Well, the normal-minded Republicans may go back to Kevin McCarthy and say, these fucking idiots, let's just come back. But still, they need Democratic votes, and we understand that Kevin McCarthy can't count on Democrats. Republicans are in a bad situation. They can't win for losing. They need to get a Speaker of the House, but they can't get their own party to agree on any one person. So it's going to be a long process, and it will be interesting to see what happens. I just hope they can get it done quickly enough so that we can get this budget bullshit done and we don't have to worry about another shutdown coming up in November. Now, there was an interview that was kind of interesting. Former President Donald Trump's one-time national security advisor, John Bolton, basically shredded the former president over the latest report about his disclosure of highly classified national defense information. That's the story where Donald Trump passed along some information to Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt, who then sent it out to 60, 70, 80 people. It's a pretty horrific lax in the security in this country. In addition to Trump's boxes of classified documents stashed at Mar-a-Lago, he talked to this Australian billionaire. And Wolf Blitzer on CNN asked John Bolton, the former national security advisor, if you, as a former national security advisor with top secret security clearance, if you shared this type of information, what would happen to you? He went on to say, well, if it were in a context like speaking to somebody like this Australian businessman with no need to know, no security clearance, no official function, it would be very serious. There's no doubt about it, said Bolton. I think the president's action have an unfortunate ripple effect and give rise to cynicism and carelessness. If he can do that, maybe he can get away with it too. And why should we be punished if he's not punished? Blitzer continued by saying, Ambassador, if you were advising Trump's 2024 rivals, would you tell them to focus on the threat Trump poses to national security? Bolton said, absolutely. I think the core argument Republicans in particular ought to be making about Trump is that he's not fit for the job. He doesn't understand the full nature of his responsibilities in the national security area. He didn't know much about the government when he was inaugurated in 2017. He learned very little since then. And I think it's a real problem when you have somebody who's more interested in talking about himself, his own self aggrandizement, seeing himself through the prism of whether it benefits Donald Trump. These are the attributes of somebody who shouldn't be sitting in the Oval Office, whatever his philosophy. And he's absolutely right. I mean, I think we know this. Most of us of a reasonable mind have known this for 7 years, 8 years. The moment he walked into the presidency, what's one of the first things he did? Interesting, too, how it plays out now that you think about what's going on now. Donald Trump went into the Oval Office with some Russian higher ups, a couple of them known to be spies. When he was in that conversation, this is right after the inauguration, remember, but when he was in that conversation, it was found out that he inadvertently leaked some military information about who? Israel. Well, Hamas seems to be very bold about what they're doing with Israel, which is kind of surprising because Israel is very strong. Let's just suppose here we've got Russia in a war with Ukraine. They've got everybody focused on them. Russia has some information about the Israeli military that they shouldn't have because Donald Trump told them, 6 years ago. Okay. What if the Russians decide, well, let's do a little divert and distract like Donnie Trump does. Let's pump up Hamas, maybe give them some weapons, give them a sense to feel confident about maybe attacking their rival, Israel, that Russia somehow, under the cover of darkness, is supporting Hamas. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just supposing here. But I'm just supposing based on the information I know. Hamas hadn't attacked Israel to this extent in a long time. And it's because you don't fuck with Israel. Israel's got a lot of power, and they will probably have the ability to wipe Hamas off the map. But if they've got the support of Russia to do this, they might feel a little more emboldened. Russia may want to distract from their problems in Ukraine. And Russia also got some inside information from Donald Trump regarding Israel's military. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. You take all those bits of information and you see what the possibilities are. We know how dangerous Donald Trump is. We know how unscrupulous the Russians are. This isn't out of the realm of possibility. I hope it's not true, but if you're looking at the situation, you have to ask that question. Hamas, why are they so bold now? I mean, I know they have an ongoing argument with Israel, but why now? Why at this moment? This moment seems very opportune for us to take our eyes off of Russia and Ukraine so they can do whatever they're going to do. It's troubling, and not unlike Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, you can't trust him at any level. And the idea that he might do something like this, some people might say I'm crazy, but think about it. It could be. I'm going to wait around and see if anybody else comes up with this thought because it's just something I came up with as I'm talking here. I told you I put things in my mind, I look at problems and I come up with different angles and I try to figure out what really is going to happen. I have no earthly idea that Russia is involved in this, but knowing what we know, I certainly would not be fucking surprised. And if they are, that poses all kinds of other problems to us. especially if we've got Republicans not willing to allow us to give money and weapons to Ukraine to fight back with Russia. But you see what happens here. This Israeli thing is going to be a big deal. It's more immediate. It's more urgent at this point because what we've got going on with Russia and Ukraine have been going on 2 years. Maybe it's a distraction. Maybe not, but maybe it is. We've got to consider that fact given the people who are involved in this situation, meaning Vladimir Putin, meaning Netanyahu in Israel, meaning who knows? Who knows? But we can't afford to have this much volatility, this toxicity in this world. It would be best to hopefully have some calm and some peace while we try to sort all the other problems of this country. But now we've got two distractions. We've got Ukraine and we've got Israel and Gaza. That's not a positive thing for us. We've got big problems here in our own country to deal with, but we can't ignore those either. And this may have all come out of Donald Trump's misdeeds over the years he was president of the United States, feeding information to anybody who fucking wanted them. I don't know. It's just something to think about. Let's see how this plays out. See if I'm on to something or I'm on something here. I don't know. But it is troubling. All right. We are going to no, we're not going to take a break. We're going to wrap things up for the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. Hope you have a great day. And we'll be back Monday with more Rational Boomer podcast.